And welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Bratter.
And I'm John Jessup. Well, the FBI is set to wrap up its investigation into the sexual assault allegations against Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
Ahead of that, President Trump is drawing criticism for appearing to mock Kavanaugh's accuser, Dr. Christine Ford. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the North Lawn to break down the details. Ben?
Well, Jenna and John, President Trump seems to be questioning the credibility of the woman who could derail his Supreme Court nominee. Some say, yes, he's making fun of Dr. Ford. Others that he's pointing out the inconsistencies in her testimony. Either way, his remarks are drawing criticism across party lines.
How did you get home? I don't remember. How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember.
Testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford claimed Judge Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her at a high school party in the 80s, but she couldn't recall some details of the night.
Where's the house? I don't know. Upstairs, downstairs, where was it? I don't know. But I had one beer. That's the only thing I remember.
Was it appropriate for President Trump to openly mock the account of Christine Ford?
I see that is the lemming-like word you're all using.
The White House says the president was simply highlighting the holes in Dr. Ford's story.
The president was stating the facts, and frankly, facts that were included in Special Prosecutor Rachel Mitchell's report. He was stating facts that were given during Dr. Ford's testimony, and the Senate has to make a decision based on those facts.
Ford's attorney called Trump's remarks vicious, vile, and a soulless attack on Dr. Ford. The FBI is wrapping up its investigation into what really happened that night. And as lawmakers wait for the details, Trump created more controversy with this warning for men.
It's a very scary time for young men in America when you can be guilty of something that you may not be guilty of.
Now, Trump has insisted that the FBI had free rein to investigate any allegations and insists he is not interfering with the process. That being said, he continues to stand by Kavanaugh, noting that this is the 7th FBI investigation on his high court nominee. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
All right, thank you, Ben. Well, as the FBI wraps up their investigation into Kavanaugh, senators are preparing to vote on his Supreme Court nomination. Abigail Robertson joins us from Capitol Hill with more. Abigail?
Well, senators on both sides of the aisle are not pleased with the president's comments yesterday. Democrats say it was reprehensible and that he owes Dr. Ford an apology. And many Republicans say they didn't like his comments either, including those 3 key Republican senators that we've been following quite closely, Senators Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins. Flake said there's no time and place for remarks like that, and Murkowski called them wholly inappropriate, and she added that she's taking everything into account when deciding how she'll vote on Kavanaugh's nomination. And here's what Collins had to say.
Are you present with the president's attacks on Christine Blasey Ford?
The president's comments were just plain wrong.
Ultimately, though, it all comes down to what these senators think of the FBI's findings that are set to come out either today or tomorrow, and not what they think of the president's actions.
So, Abby, what comes after that investigation by the FBI? What's the process going to be to bring that vote to the floor?
Yes. Well, if Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants to vote this week on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, which he has said repeatedly that he does, he must file cloture by midnight tonight to set up a vote for either Friday or Saturday, depending on if they use the full 30 hours for debate on this nomination. Otherwise, if cloture is not filed today, we may not see the vote until Sunday at the earliest.
And Abigail, obviously this whole process has been so contentious, but you spoke with some lawmakers who have really been relying on their faith through all of it.
Yes. Well, I think many on both sides will be happy to see this end. Things are very tense here on Capitol Hill. But I talked with Democratic Senator Chris Coons earlier today, who is on the Judiciary Committee, and he's also co-chair of the National Prayer Breakfast. And he's a part of a bipartisan group of Christian senators. They meet every Wednesday and they pray together and they study the Word with Senate Chaplain Barry Black. And he told me he was actually the speaker at this morning's breakfast. And he says that every day he tries to pray for the president and the Senate. But this week, more than anything, he's just been praying for humility and for wisdom from the Lord. And one other interesting thing about that Bible study, when I've talked to Chaplain Black about it, he says that he told me that they close each meeting holding hands with one another in prayer because they believe it's hard to then go and stab someone in the back on the Senate floor that you've just literally been holding hands and praying with. But he did add, while it's hard, it's not impossible.
Yeah. Abby, that's something you don't hear anywhere else, so appreciate that anecdotal story. One last question for you. You've been up there every day for the last couple of weeks. You have a finger on the pulse of what's happening on Capitol Hill. Can you give us a sense, has there been any movement when it comes to where senators lie when it comes to this vote? Do you think that Kavanaugh will be confirmed, or is it now even more so in question as they wait for the FBI investigation?
Well, I think once again, really Kavanaugh's fate rests in those three key senators, Flake, Murkowski, and Collins. They've really kept together as a group during this process, and I think that they are very eager to see this FBI investigation, which I've learned only senators will be able to see this. They are going to keep that under wraps. I've heard there will be just one copy delivered to the Senate, and then senators will be able to go look at it themselves, and only 9 staff members, I think, will be able to see it. So when the FBI releases that investigation, they're going to try and keep it as secret as possible, and then senators will have to make the decision once those findings come out on how they're going to vote on Judge Kavanaugh.
Well, Abigail Robertson will continue her coverage of the confirmation vote as the week goes on.
Thank you.
And Jennifer Wishon and Amber Strong are here now to discuss the repercussions of the Kavanaugh case. Ladies, thank you both for joining us. Amber, I want to start with you. Let's talk about the midterm elections and how this could really affect those.
Well, as we see already on both sides of the aisle, this is definitely going to be a rallying point. Regardless of where you stand, you see the GOP, led by Lindsey Graham, saying, look, this is the Democrats, and I hope you never get power. Again, because this is the kind of people that you're going to be. On the flip side, you see the Me Too movement and women and Democrats who are going to say, look, this is how the GOP sees women. This is how they value women. It's interesting, a poll came out recently. This was an NPR PBS poll looking at suburban women. So these are these same college-educated suburban women.
Critical voting bloc.
Critical voting bloc, those same women that took down Roy Moore in Alabama. 47% of them said if a candidate supported Brett Kavanaugh, they won't support them. They're likely not to support them.
And that's a crucial voting bloc for the Republican Party.
Yeah, and this is, and Amber, you're right, this is going to affect everything unless something else huge happens between now and November, which could happen. But, I think another point that Republicans need to take away from this is we saw the Republican men who run the Senate Judiciary Committee having to import a woman to question Dr. Ford. Republicans have to do a better job of, one, recruiting female candidates to run for office, and number 2, getting comfortable talking about these issues. These are husbands with daughters and mothers. They care about them at the core, but they have to get comfortable talking about issues of sexual assault and women's issues.
Jennifer, Amber just hit on this theme about Me Too. We're living in the Me Too era, and people are taking allegations more seriously than ever before. How did this Me Too moment play into the Kavanaugh situation?
Well, I think it's meant everything, and I think you look no farther than the way Anita Hill was treated, the way Monica Lewinsky was treated by the nation, not just the media. The nation treated them poorly. But I think what we've seen through the Kavanaugh hearings, through these accusations, is that Me Too has become extremely muddy. This is not about politics. And if you're taking sides when it comes to allegations of sexual assault and a person's right to defend themselves, then you're not on the side of justice. And I think that Me Too is all about women feeling comfortable coming forward, sharing their experiences, seeking justice for wrongs that have been committed against them, and for men understanding that there are certain ways you don't treat women, and that's not okay. But when politics enters this, then I think that it just becomes cheapened.
Speaking of muddying the waters, yesterday the president said, and let me make sure I have his quote right, he said it's a very scary time for young men in America, and that was in response to having a message for men in America living in the Me Too moment. I think there is a little bit of muddled philosophy out there. We live in a system where our justice system says you're innocent until proven guilty. But in the Me Too movement, there does seem to be a little bit of a shift. And that's been some of the arguments for Kavanaugh supporters who say this man is having to prove his innocence rather than he's innocent to proven guilty. Do you think, even though that may be a legitimate point, was the president perhaps the right person to make that point given the role that he plays in our Me Too moment as well?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's fine for the president of the United States to make that point, but I think it's clear that this president does not have credibility when it comes to this issue, which is unfortunate. But I think, you know, in terms of innocent until proven guilty, we've seen Republicans treat this as a trial. They brought in a prosecutor, and they're really pushing this innocence until proven guilty. Democrats are treating this as a job interview. And so we're seeing they're anticipating perhaps this FBI investigation is not going to come up with the kind of dirt that they want it to. And so they're saying, well, he was too feisty. It was not a good job interview. So Republicans and Democrats are treating the hearings in completely different ways.
Framing it completely differently.
Last night, if you were watching President Trump at this political rally, you saw him more or less mocking Dr. Ford, Amber, and then you saw, you know, the crowd respond pretty enthusiastically. What did you make of that?
You know, here's the thing. There are two groups watching this, right? So you have your diehard supporters of the president who say, that's exactly how I feel. He's not mocking her. He's saying exactly how I feel, and he's just repeating her testimony. On the other side, you can bet your bottom dollar that a picture or a video of him saying that is going to be paired with Dr. Christine Ford on campaign ads across this country all the way until November. Because on the other side of that, you have a record number of women, 180 Democratic women who won their primaries, who are going toward the midterms, and they're going to say, look, this is our president, this is how he feels about women. So that right there can be a talking point for either side. It's just about who buys into it more at this point.
I will say, you know, often Americans look at Washington and say Washington is the problem. Washington is a reflection of the nation. And Amber's exactly right. If you look at social media, which this president tends to do from time to time.
He's very good at it.
He's very good at it. You see Republicans, conservatives, over and over again, looking at the gaps in Dr. Ford's testimony, looking at the timing as to when she came forward, and the president was reflecting that.
Jennifer, I wanted to talk to you. There's a lot of conversation about kind of what John was touching on, you know, having to prove your innocence rather than the presumption that you are innocent until you're proven guilty. You are the mother of a son. A lot of mothers have come out and said they're concerned that a precedent could be set, that their son could be wrongly accused. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a huge fear that mothers across the nation are experiencing right now. How do they talk to their sons about this? You know, and the problem and, well, the challenge with all of this is that different women accept and interpret things differently. And so an advance by someone who you like is not the same as an advance by someone you don't like. And so determining that as a young man, I'm sure can be challenging. But these are serious conversations that I think families are having. But you know what, Jenna, it's good that families are having these conversations because for too long, let's be honest, for way too long, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's on dates, whether it's while taking a run in your neighborhood, women have been mistreated. And the fact that we're even talking about this, even though politics is muddying it, is a good thing.
You know, last question, and maybe both Amber and Jennifer, you can weigh in on this. You had just mentioned contrasting this with the Anita Hill hearings. I want to know whether Judge Kavanaugh is confirmed or not. We'll find out later this week if that vote does indeed happen. But can Judge Kavanaugh's career survive this?
Will his career survive? Definitely. Especially if he's confirmed to the Supreme Court, he'll be just fine, right? Clarence Thomas is sitting on the Supreme Court right now. Will there always be a cloud around his career? Definitely. You look at the comments he made during his testimony. Was he fired up and angry? For sure. But he also made comments about the Clintons paying him back. Whether or not he was angry aside, every time he rules, someone's going to point back to that and say, look, we told you that he was a little bit partisan. So his career will never be the same as far as his legal career is concerned.
Right. It's my understanding that Harvard University has already canceled a class that he was going to be teaching. Right. He will never live this down. You never hear a story about Clarence Thomas without a reference back to Anita Hill. That was 27 years ago.
Jennifer Wishon, Amber Strong, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, although there is an open seat, the Supreme Court began hearing cases this week. Two of the cases they took up focus on private property rights in America. Paul Strand reports from the court.
Two of the first cases the Supreme Court took up involve your private property rights and could affect what happens if government suddenly decides it wants a piece of your land. One case involves some private property in Louisiana and the endangered dusky gopher frog, which exists only in Mississippi. The government's taking 1,500 acres of Edward Pointavant's timber-growing land in Louisiana because the endangered frog might have lived there many decades ago.
This frog is critically endangered, just about 100 of them left, and it used to be found across Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi.
But Pacific Legal Foundation lawyer Mark Miller argues this land grab will cost his client millions on a gamble the frog could maybe live there.
He'd be looking at $34 million in lost income, but that doesn't matter to the government.
It's over 1,500 acres, almost double the size of Central Park in New York.
Atkins says the land is perfect for the frogs. Pointavant says it needs a ton of money to prepare it.
The ponds there are in an ideal state, and when they're not in the ponds, they live in stump holes, and that land has the stump holes.
And it would take millions and millions and millions of dollars to recreate that habitat.
That's absolutely false.
Miller says the government shouldn't be able to just do this. It'd be like ripping up Manhattan skyscrapers because deer used to wander there when it was forest.
Let's declare Manhattan to be critical habitat for that deer, and then we'll just simply do whatever we got to do to protect that endangered deer in Manhattan.
The other case involves Pennsylvanian Rose Nick, whose 90-acre farm has been in her family for decades. But Scott Township has decided some stones on her land may be gravestones, and she has to fix up the area and leave it open to the public every day of the year, or be heavily fined, rather than compensated for this taking of her land. Attorney Christina Martin.
And if she didn't do that, they would fine her $300 to $600 per day.
Can you just imagine what it's like to have people every day on your property?
Nick wants a federal court to shoo the township away, but can't because of an old Supreme Court ruling that says she must first go through state courts before going federal when it comes to property rights. Martin says property rights should be just as important as your other constitutional rights.
And if you have no way of enforcing your rights, then your rights are sort of meaningless. It's just words on paper.
Paul Strand, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
While the United States is pulling out of a treaty we've had with Iran since the 1950s. Welcome back. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the United States is terminating a 1955 treaty with Iran. That treaty regulates commerce and diplomacy with the foreign adversary. CBN News national security correspondent Eric Rosales has more on the growing tensions between the U.S. and Iran.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held nothing back when he said the move to terminate the 1955 Treaty of Amity was, quote, 39 years overdue.
Iran is attempting to interfere with the sovereign rights of the United States to take lawful actions necessary to protect our national security. And Iran is abusing the ICJ for political and propaganda purposes.
Pompeo's announcement came after the International Court of Justice ordered the United States to lift some sanctions affecting imports on humanitarian goods and products to Iran. Hours later, National Security Advisor John Bolton announced the U.S. is withdrawing from yet another treaty with Iran, made before the United Nations Court, a court which Bolton says is ineffective.
It's closing doors that shouldn't be open to politicized abuse, which is what we've consistently seen in the ICJ.
Pompeo says the U.S. will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to Iranian refugees, but notes Iran continues to use its money on terrorism.
The choices that are being made inside of Iran today to use money to foment terror around the world, to launch ballistic missiles into airports throughout the Middle East, to arm proxy militias in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon, those are dollars that the Iranian leadership is squandering.
So it's a war of words right now. It was a wise move. The U.S. should not let anything impact its sanctions power.
Iran policy experts say this is just another diplomatic full-court press by Iran, using a 1950s treaty to isolate the U.S. today.
If Iran upheld half of the things that the previous governments prior to the revolution agreed to with the U.S. international community, the country would be much better off than it is today.
I truly believe that Pompeo said it best. He said that Iran is worried about the economic sanctions that are going to be coming against it. So the Trump administration plans to implement those sanctions by November 4th. And they also plan to bring those sanctions against all oil sales as well.
Right around the corner.
That's Eric, right. Iran considers this ruling by the International Court of Justice as a victory, and it kind of opens this to a Pandora's box in some ways.
Yeah, and you know, the famous words of Admiral Yamamoto from Japan saying that they've woken the sleeping dog, and yeah, Iran has America's wide awake right now. So Iran is really using the international court as more of a propaganda, and that's what Bolton was trying to say. It's like we're really going after that, so we really need to take a closer look at that. And then my sources are also saying that we're going to actually look at some of the other agreements that were made within that court as well. So that could actually spell even more sanctions, not just for Iran, but for maybe other countries.
Well, about 30 seconds left. First, you had the Iran deal that we pulled out of, and now you have this. It looks like Pompeo is really upping the pressure on the alleged activity with Iran.
Oh, he is. I mean, we're tired of it, and he already said that the United States is not going to sit by idle. You know, what we did was we actually pulled out our diplomats out of Iran, out of Bahrain. So, you know, we're going to have to see exactly what other type of pressure that we can continue to put on Iran, but we're going to go put in those sanctions come November 4th.
Eric Rosales, thank you as always.
Coming up, a sneak peek at how a new surgery saved the life of the president of Liberty University.
Jerry Falwell Jr. says he is blessed to be alive.
That's right, Jenna. In an exclusive interview with CBN News chief political analyst David Brody, Falwell recalls the heart issue that could have cost him his life.
When I was at his office and did the test, and it showed clearly there was a large hole, Tony Nobles, the inventor of this process, was there. He texted Ben Carson. Ben texted me right back and said, Jerry, this is one of those few times when it's good to find out you have a hole in your heart, because now you know what caused it, and now we can fix it. I called the president the night before the procedure, 11:30 at night. He answered his phone and told him about it. He called me a week later at 11:30 at night. He said, Jerry, I need you. You got to take care of yourself. How'd it go? And he said, now, Ben Carson told you about this? I said, yeah. He said, well, then I get credit, right? I said, yes. I said, this is my reward for supporting you.
Very nice. So what about the wave of the future here? I say the future is now. I mean, this is happening. So where are we going with this procedure in terms of what it means for patients really worldwide?
Absolutely. Well, it's a new technology. You know, we are the first center in the U.S. to use the Noble Stitch to close PFOs, but in Europe it's already spread like wildfire. So it's going to take time, but hopefully not too long, to train other physicians in the U.S. And we expect this technology to close holes in the heart with a stitch rather than with a device to really take over the market and help a lot of patients out there.
Not to make it an Oprah situation, but when you got introduced on stage earlier, there was a hug there. I mean, in other words, this is a man that really came to your aid.
He really did, and he and I are close to the same age. We like the same kind of music. We
70s rock.
70s rock,
yeah,
yes. So we played that when I was on the operating table. I was wide awake. I could feel the device coming up through my chest, and asked for a little more sedation, but it was. Yeah, we really did hit it off, as did Tony Nobles and I. And now my sister is going to have this. She's a surgeon, been a surgeon in Richmond for 25 years. She has the same condition. She's going to have the same procedure done.
Well, you like 70s rock, but not Stairway to Heaven quite yet, right?
Pink Floyd, Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Well, David spoke with Falwell and his doctor today in Lynchburg, Virginia.
And we will bring you the full story right here tomorrow.
You know, they bonded over 70s rock. For me, it would be the Eagles.
Me too.
Hotel
I love
California.
The Eagles, Desperado.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.